From the Sunshine State, this is Tampa Bay's Tan Talk.
It's time for FLALAW, brought to you by the personal injury attorneys of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes. This hour will be informative, along with taking your questions and comments. Now, here are your hosts for today's show.
That's right. We are back with FLALAW live on the radio. As our intro said, we are the attorneys of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes. Thank you for joining us. We are here every Tuesday at 5 o'clock with your live legal call-in talk show. So thank you for joining us tonight. Hopefully you are a faithful listener. If you are, then call up a friend and tell a friend that we are on the air. Of course, as you know, we're at WTAN live in the studios at 106.1 FM and 1340 AM, but we're also streaming live on various platforms tonight as well. So before we jump into our show, and I'll let you know who my wonderful co-host is with me tonight, I want to give you all the details so you know how to stream it and continue to listen to us for the next hour, because this is an hour-long legal call-in talk show, and we want you to get the full show in all the various forms, especially if you want to see us. We are live in the studio tonight as well, where you can leave your comments in the comment section. And that way, if you have a question or something that you want to ask, you can do that tonight. So first and foremost, if you would like to call in with a question as we're going through some current events and relevant topics on the show tonight, the best way to call into the studio is going to be 441-3000. That's our call-in number. Again, that's 441-3000. That is how you're going to be able to call into the studio and get your question answered live over the air. Also, you can stream us live. Right now, we're streaming from Facebook and YouTube. So if you would like to find our live stream, if you want to chime in, leave a comment, ask a question, or just continue to watch after you get out of your car or walk away from your radio, or you want to share it with someone who maybe is out of our listening area, but they want to tune into the show, this is the way to do it on Facebook or YouTube. So if you want to find it, search for the firm name, Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes Injury Lawyers. Perenich is spelled Perenich. If you type that into your search bar, you should see the firm name with a red circle around the logo. That will let you know that we are currently live. Click on that profile and it'll take you to the account. And you'll see Lori and I in the studio. And that means that you're watching the right broadcast. Of course, if you don't have Facebook, you can do the same thing over on YouTube, and that's how you'll be able to find us. These shows do remain up on our accounts after the show is over. You can go back and maybe if you missed the beginning or you have to leave early, you didn't catch the end, that's okay, not a problem. You can go back to those accounts and watch the entire show on those platforms as well. Additionally, for all the podcast people out there, I know that podcasts are very, very interesting and entertaining, especially if you love the legal podcast, and this is the kind of show that you want to follow. We are on all podcast platforms for the most part, especially if you had a long commute and you just want to listen to a good legal show. Follow us at FLALAW on the radio. That's the name of our podcast. You can pretty much find it on, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, most places where podcasts are consumed, you can find FLALAW on the radio. Tonight's show will be put up later, and then, of course, you can find past broadcasts and past guests. So if there were other shows that you'd like to go back and listen to, you can do that on our podcast as well. We encourage you to follow us so that you never miss a show. With that being said, we have a great show for you tonight. But before we jump into the current events, because we've got a couple articles and different things that I'm going to go over with my co-host tonight, we also have a question that kind of trickled over from last week that I would love to make sure we get answered for one of our listeners. But before we jump into that question from our listener, Lori, I wanted you to go ahead and reintroduce yourself. You, of course, are a frequent co-host, my colleague at the firm, so that everybody knows who's on the show with me tonight.
Yes, no, I'm always happy to sit co-pilot here with you, Jacqlyn. So, Lorrie Robinson,
thank you.
Been with the law firm quite a few years now, and we always are so happy to be able to offer this kind of a service to the community, so that we can get a few questions answered or just talk about some things that might be of general interest.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, with that being said, we did have a question that came in late after the show had actually ended last week. And we want to make sure that listener gets his question answered. Even if, he's not listening, maybe he can tune into the show later or get one of the broadcasts from the live streams and he'll see that his question was answered. But hopefully he's listening, because we heard someone had a question about these golf carts that are becoming ever so popular.
Oh, yes.
It depends on where you live. Some communities it's very, very popular. Some not so much. It just depends. To me, at a time, golf carts were just kind of mostly, regulated to the golf court communities.
Right.
If you lived in a neighborhood that had a golf course, then you would see the golf carts. But mostly on the golf green, not riding around the neighborhood or at the grocery store or the gym. Now you see them everywhere.
Yes, yes.
And they just might be on the roadway driving alongside you, on your way home on main, streets. So this particular question, and I wish I had his name, but unfortunately I don't know. But this listener wanted to know about insurance coverages for these golf carts. And so my understanding, and of course, Lorrie, you can chime in, is that they're not all created equal. So there's kind of the low speed vehicles, which are probably the more traditional golf cart that people are familiar with, that you may see on an actual golf course, that usually don't get over more than maybe 20 miles per hour. Typically, you don't see tags on those vehicles. They may not have any type of license plate. And then there's the alternative where they do have tags. They do have a Florida license plate and VIN number, and they tend to be able to go a lot faster and keep up with the normal flow of traffic. So that tends to be the distinction, based on my understanding of the law, is that the registered golf carts that actually have physical Florida license plates and their registered VIN numbers do have to comply with Florida insurance requirements. And that's pretty much the PIP and the property damage.
But you can see we were talking off air that, so many people love the use of the golf cart in this setting. And so part of what people don't think about, like if you own a golf cart that has more capability and is faster and really is a lot more like a regular vehicle, then you certainly want insurance and are required to have it because it's being used like a vehicle on the roads. But I would say the other thing I think is a concern, as we're on the roads, is there are so many more people using the golf carts.
So many more, yeah.
And some that may be in a gray area that maybe aren't required to have insurance. But if you are in a condition where you're driving such a golf cart like that, you maybe should review, at least with an insurance agent or something, what your exposure is.
Yes.
Because obviously these are situations that can end up in accidents.
Very much so, especially now with. I was telling you off the air where I have encountered where golf carts are usually parked right up front at the gym, or I'm driving next to one in the parking lot at Publix, and they're again just like any other standard vehicle, but they don't necessarily have all the features that standard vehicles have. Some of them have blinkers, but they're not as, to me, readily easy to see, and it's just they to me come with a lot of vulnerabilities.
Oh yeah, they're smaller profile, and so there's a danger as driving a car. You may not see it, but and not to mention the danger to the person driving the golf cart.
Yep.
Because they are very vulnerable because they're open air vehicles.
Yes,
so
very much so.
Yeah.
And it was funny that I'm glad this listener brought it up, because I myself, even as a personal injury attorney, didn't give much thought to it when I was in another country celebrating my anniversary. And we went over to Isla Mujeres, which is basically a very small island in Mexico that is pretty much the main mode of travel. Yeah. Even the native people that live there, they have golf carts. Most people don't have actual vehicles. And so when you get there, that's their main tourist draw, is to get everybody to come in and rent a golf cart so that they can go around the island. And now that I think about it, they did not require any of us to provide proof of insurance or even purchase insurance. And I think the only requirement was that you had a driver's license, and that was it. And they keep your license, and you get your license back when you return the golf cart. And I remember asking a lot of questions about the safety of the vehicle. I'm like, do the brakes work? He's like, yeah, you want to test out the brakes? And when he gave me one where the power steering was very, very difficult to use. And so I was like, not that one. I don't want that one. Give me a different one. But that's the thing, is like, I didn't even consider the fact that was probably not the safest thing.
Well, right.
And it's just golf carts galore. They're everywhere.
I mean, in that setting, and obviously I'm sure you had a great time.
Yeah, it was fun.
It's very good.
But hindsight.
Hindsight is always 20/20. Yeah. And so particularly in our environments where it seems like we talked before about the electric bicycles and all of these.
Yes.
We're seeing so many more of these, and it's just, as driving a vehicle, you just aren't necessarily expecting that.
Exactly right. I think that was one of the questions too, Ed, I think, right, with the listener asked about e-bikes and scooters and things like that too. And so sadly, you're not required to have any type of insurance when you're operating those e-bikes and scooters. And you see a lot of that in those downtown areas nowadays, where it can be quite dangerous. And we're seeing a lot of accidents involving the e-bike or e-bikes, bicyclists, and the scooters. And a lot of times I think, again, it comes to just not being able to visually appreciate what's going on when you have these fast-moving small vehicles, and they're not always in compliance with traffic flow and traffic laws, and they're coming off sidewalks and side streets and different things. And so it's a very new way to travel, but you also have to be very wise about how you're operating these vehicles. Because
I think it's going to become even more popular, because obviously there are a lot of people that can't afford a car.
I agree.
Or maybe they have an issue with their driver's license. So in that sense, it's fantastic.
Yeah, I agree.
For transportation, but as a driver of vehicles, it is a little bit disconcerting and sometimes kind of annoying.
Very much so, and they can cause a lot of damage too. Even though they're smaller vehicles, once they impact with another vehicle, that can still cause quite a considerable impact to your own vehicle, which is why I had a very, very long conversation with a client today, because sadly she's dealing with a situation where she was in a car accident with another party, and there was lots of property damage to guardrails and all kinds of things, and she didn't have collision coverage.
Oh gosh.
And so we're waiting for all these things to get sorted out before she can even be compensated for her vehicle damage. And so you have to keep in mind, if you collide with another scooter or e-bike or a golf cart, and that person does not have coverage on that type of a vehicle, you have to have the kind of coverage that's going to protect you in those kinds of situations, whether that be collision or uninsured motorist coverage, which we always talk about on these kinds of shows. Because when you get involved with an accident with those kinds of cars, whether it be an e-bike, scooter, or golf cart, that person may not have coverage. Now, as we mentioned earlier, though, if they have a registered golf cart that does bear a Florida license plate, then they are supposed to carry coverage. But we know in Florida that does not mean that they'll have bodily injury coverage. So it's just something to keep in mind when you're in the roadway, especially if you know you live in a community where these types of vehicles are popular. And as Lorrie said, I think they're only going to get more and more popular. They're almost like little status symbols, I think, for some little bit of it. Because we'll go to the park and it's like the kids will roll up with their parents in the golf cart, and they're like, "Oh, we brought our golf cart to the park." And I think it's cute. It's like it's a cute toy, but it's like really, you live like 2 blocks away. You didn't need to bring the golf cart, but it's one of those things. I think it's just a fun toy that everybody likes nowadays, which I'm not knocking, and I think they're fun. but you have to also be safe. So hopefully our listener was tuning in and was able to get some feedback on his question regarding the golf carts. Be safe, of course, because they are becoming more and more prevalent in today's community and society, especially in some of the 55 and up communities as well. It's very popular. Places like the Villages and things like that. Okay, so moving right along. We haven't done this in a little bit, but we're getting back to talking about some current events, things that are in the news over the past couple weeks in our local area. In case you didn't know, we are Florida personal injury attorneys, which means we are based and licensed in the state of Florida. So the things we talk about are always going to be centered from a Florida perspective in terms of Florida law and looking at personal injury matters through that kind of a lens. And so sometimes we'll pick up on national news, but of course we're looking at it from a perspective under Florida law. So with that being said, I don't know if you had heard about it, but yesterday the actor Alec Baldwin and his brother Stephen Baldwin were involved in a collision that made headlines because they pretty much had a head-on collision with a large tree and smashed the whole front end of.
Oh gosh, I just heard of it, like a headline, but I don't know what the circumstances were.
Fortunately, they both seemed to be okay, and so I think that's what everybody initially was wondering if they were okay. But I think he later came out and posted a video of some kind on social media to let everybody know that he was fine. So I'm going to go over the article, and then we'll kind of talk about it. Now, this, of course, happened in the Hamptons, so Florida law will not necessarily apply there, but we're going to look at it from the Florida law perspective. So basically from this article, it says that Alec Baldwin did come out and assure his fans that he is fine after crashing his vehicle into a tree in the Hamptons on Monday morning. TMZ first reported on the crash in the East Hamptons, New York. Photos showed the front end of the white Range Rover was crushed against a large tree. Baldwin said that his brother Stephen was visiting for the Hamptons International Film Festival and was in the car with him. This is his Alec Baldwin's own words. "This morning, I was in a car accident. A guy cut me off in a truck, a big garbage truck the size of a whale," the actor said in a video that he posted to Instagram. "This was the biggest garbage truck I'd ever seen. To avoid hitting him, I hit a tree. It was a big, fat tree. I crushed my car. I crushed my wife's car, and I feel bad about that. But it's all fine," he continued. "I'm fine, and my brother's fine." Baldwin thanked the East Hampton Police Department for responding to the crash and said he'd soon be on his way to Los Angeles to see his family. His wife, Hilaria, has been competing on Dancing with the Stars, although she was eliminated in last week's episode. He went on to talk about how proud he is of his wife and that he was not hurt in the crash. His brother is doing fine and is grateful that no one was injured, and that he appreciated everybody's concern. So with that being said, I had a little bit of some inquiries or curiosity about this whale of a garbage truck that he described, and how he basically, let's assume, that it didn't go as well as it did. Apparently he and his brother are doing well, but if there were injuries, and this happened in Florida, as an experienced personal injury attorney, how do you approach a situation like that where you have this huge vehicle, a commercial vehicle that he describes as basically the only way that he could avoid it because he was cut off was to go head on into this large tree? How do you approach that?
Well, when we represent people, we're looking to understand circumstances and see what we could do to help, obviously in accordance with the applicable law. So in a situation like that, if you take those facts as accurate, which in the Hamptons, I was like, the biggest garbage truck I ever saw, the size of a whale, I'm not so sure. But if you take those facts as they are presented, then, and presuming also that couldn't see the company for the garbage truck or whatever, obviously, if you could identify the vehicle, then on those facts, the vehicle was negligent, the driver of that vehicle, of the garbage truck, in pulling in front or cutting off the vehicle that Alex Baldwin was in or driving. So that would be a negligence case there, but it's kind of the way these facts come at us doesn't seem like there's an actual identification of, or a way even probably to identify who that was. So in that scenario, it doesn't mean that there still isn't negligence, but again, if you're in Florida, and probably most other states, but certainly in Florida, we would be looking at uninsured motorists to cover any liability in that situation. And that you'd make a claim to the insurance company. And when there's a phantom vehicle like that, I mean, and the police did arrive, so you can establish that it occurred. And
that was going to be part of my question. How do you really establish, for UM purposes, because at that point your own carrier stands in the shoes of that party for all intents and purposes, and you have the burden to really prove that this did occur.
Right. And I think one thing, when we have cases, which we have a lot of cases in which our clients do fortunately have uninsured motorist coverage, and you are suing because you end up suing your own company.
Right.
And people are often, until they understand, and obviously we talk with them about that's what that insurance is for, but it does seem kind of funny because then your insurance company takes on and steps into the shoes, in effect, in this case, of that big whale of a garbage truck. And now they're arguing it was a big whale of a garbage truck. How could you miss it? You should have seen me or whatever. But nonetheless, it does mean that you always, in a situation like that with a phantom vehicle, you will absolutely want to call the police.
Yes.
You need a police report to establish as best you can, what the actual circumstances are, so that there isn't a reasonable basis to dispute it on the part of the insurance company.
Are there skid marks? Are there something that can corroborate the fact that there was this big, large garbage truck vehicle? Were there witnesses that saw, the garbage truck, kind of run you off the road? Because it doesn't sound like there was any contact between the garbage truck and his vehicle.
Right.
So to me, that makes it kind of tricky.
Mm-hmm. I think so, because there'd be a lot of, we often will have arguments in Florida of what's referred to as comparative negligence.
Yes.
And so in a situation like this, maybe the garbage truck was driven in a fashion in which it could have been more careful, maybe kind of cut him off, but there's always going to be an argument that maybe Alec Baldwin wasn't paying enough attention. He could have avoided this. And then we add the extra layer in Florida that, after we had a change in the law a couple of years ago, if a jury were to conclude that Alec Baldwin in this scenario was more than 50% responsible, then there would be no insurance coverage, no liability at all. But,
exactly right. Unfortunately, that's the way the law has now changed in our state, and that was part of what I was going to ask, is because he has already given this video statement about what happened, and so then it could become important to determine whether or not the swerve that he made into the tree, was that a reasonable, reaction to what happened. And then you have his brother, who's also a celebrity or an actor, who potentially could make a claim against his own brother.
Yes, actually. And in that situation, you can see where, it's really, the way it's described, it's very fortunate that there was not injury, because we would see so often in a situation where, the way it's described, again, it sounds like quite a lot of impact. That even if you were not immediately clearly badly injured, you might have the soft tissue injury, the whiplash type injury, even lower back injuries that we see all the time, where people have been thrown around enough in the vehicle so that the body, over a period of hours, sometimes a few days, ends up with really very bad pain, muscular pain that sometimes goes away completely, thank goodness, but sometimes it does not, and the person's left with a strain, sprain type injury that becomes chronic.
Right, and that is actually my next point, and this is for anybody injured in a car accident, not just celebrities, but obviously Alec Baldwin came out and created a video describing what happened, and also discussing the fact that he does not have any injuries and that his brother is not injured. And this has now been memorialized for all to see. With that being said, what is your advice or approach when you have a situation like this? this was literally made, I believe that this video
Yes.
was put out the day of the impact.
Do not do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you don't know how you're going to feel in a day or
Right.
two, you know?
And the reality is, and you know, it's, of course, he was involved in a very tragic incident on a movie set.
Not long ago,
Not
yeah.
that long ago, a couple of years ago, maybe now, where, and, you know, without getting into those facts, which I don't know anything beyond, you know, what you see in a headline type thing. But
I know it was recently resolved, but I can't recall the outcome.
I mean, I think there probably has been a civil action because it ended up that somebody on the set was shot, you know,
Right.
while he was performing, while he was acting, but somehow it was the gun, the firearm was not
A live round.
Yeah, it was a live round in there, but I think he did a little talking in that instance too, you know, really. And so in terms of these situations, number one, when you're in an accident, it's upsetting, it's traumatizing, always.
Right.
It's shocking. And so it really is best, I mean, obviously cooperate with police and things like that. We're not saying not to do that, you know. And although if there was a criminal implication, which his other situation
Which there was in the other case.
did have
yeah.
that, you know, because of a kind of a criminal level of gross negligence, which can become a manslaughter, you know, type thing. But generally speaking, it's a pretty good idea to keep your mouth shut, get some advice, you know, talk to an attorney if there are any implications. I think in this case, obviously, he wanted to try to make the story go away as quickly as possible.
He wanted to address it very quickly,
Yeah,
yeah.
but-
and now that you mentioned it, I was trying to see if it mentioned what time of day this incident happened. And only because sometimes when it's late at night,
Right.
you know, and we know celebrities in the Hamptons, there's drinking at
I mean,
times.
with the film
and
festival. It's
The
like,
film festival, his brother's in town. So I was curious, but there's no mention of exactly what time it happened. We've seen other celebrities in the news that have been, I think it was Justin Timberlake last year in the Hamptons and got a DUI. And so that, to me, can come into play if his brother were injured or, you know, someone had
Right.
been hurt, that they didn't say anything about giving any field sobriety testing or breathalyzer or anything like that. So that's an issue that I'm curious as to whether that was even investigated.
Right,
at
you
all.
you do kind of wonder about that. I'm almost
Yeah.
thinking in this situation, maybe he should be taking a golf cart.
He probably should have been in a golf cart instead of his wife's Range Rover that he apparently feels very bad about.
Yes, and I
totaling,
think she
so.
can be a little snippy sometimes.
Yeah,
so,
I've heard that she's not very well. She's not very popular with people. It seems. I don't know why. I don't know the whole backstory with his wife, but apparently people don't love her. But with that being said, I hope that what he said is true and that him and his brother are
absolutely.
completely
And then just for
fine
general
and-
purposes, we're being a little bit humorous here, but it does illustrate some of the issues that do come up in a real life case that could happen in Florida. Yeah.
Right, and it could have had a very far worse outcome, and so we're glad that he and his brother are fine. With that being said, it's probably a good time to take a short break, and then we'll come back with a more local story that was not that long ago, and it does have a sad impact because it involves students on a school bus. So we'll come back after a short break, and we'll keep going on with our current events and talking about it from the Florida law perspective.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
After a car accident, there are many questions that you need answers to. Who pays for my car repairs? Who pays for the medical bills? What about my lost wages? And more. The personal injury law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes has been answering these questions for their clients for nearly 70 years. Since 1955, they've been a voice of the injured in the legal system. As one of the longest established law firms in Tampa Bay, Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes is here to answer your questions. Listen to their live call-in radio show on this channel every Tuesday evening from 5 to 6 p.m. or call them at 727-796-8282 or visit them at voiceoftheinjured.com. Offices Clearwater, non-attorney spokesperson.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
we're back with FLALAW live on the radio. Thank you for joining us. This is your live legal call-in talk show. We are the attorneys at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. My name is Jacqlyn Bryant. I'm here with my co-host, Lorrie Robinson, and we have been going over some various personal injury matters from the Florida law perspective as it pertains to some current events that are in the news. And we just touched on the Alec Baldwin incident, the car crash that sadly happened in the Hamptons yesterday. And now we're going to move on to something a little bit more local and talk about something that was in the news recently that happened over in the Lakewood Ranch area, I believe it was, across the Skyway Bridge. And this involved a school bus, multiple school buses actually. So it basically says that, this is in Bradenton, Florida, several high school students were hospitalized and a 2-year-old was airlifted to a hospital after a crash involved 4 school buses and a Ford Expedition, according to the Florida Highway Patrol. The crash happened this past Saturday night on State Road 70 in Bradenton after an eyewitness saw a car cut off the first bus, causing all the buses to suddenly stop.
Wow.
The Ford then hit the back of the last bus in the line. The Ford caught on fire in the right eastbound lane. The collision then caused each bus to hit the bus in front of it. So that kind of a domino effect. In total, 6 students were taken to the hospital along with the driver of the Ford. 5 of the 6 students have been released from the hospital. It looks as though the school board did put out a statement because I guess the children were heading to a band competition at Lakewood Ranch High School when this all happened. And so the school board did say that they're deeply grateful to the education partners in Manatee County Schools for their swift assistance and support. Manatee County Schools provided 2 buses to transport our students safely back to Fort Pierce Central late last night, and the students were reunited with their parents early this morning. The superintendent went on to say that his thoughts are with the students and families and staff members who were impacted by the accident, and they're incredibly thankful for the immediate response and support for the Manatee County Schools to ensure that the students were safe and that their well-being was prioritized. So that is an interesting kind of chain reaction type of an accident. But it's not as uncommon as you might think, especially if you take a trip up I-4, you might be likely to see something like that on the side of the road. And it can cause, traffic to back up. And it's just a horrible thing when you see this kind of ripple effect. And so that's what I wanted to kind of dissect with you when you come into a scenario like this, where it's one of these chain reactions, and as a personal injury attorney, and let's say you represent one or more of the individuals that have now been hurt because of this, when you're looking at it from Florida law, how are you apportioning or figuring out who's at fault in this kind of a multi-vehicle accident?
This is going to be quite the complicated scenario.
Yeah.
And you're going to have lots of claimants, lots of lawyers involved, because generally speaking, lawyers represent only one party. Not always, but there can sometimes be conflicts of interest, so often that'll be the case. But so you're going to have all of that, and I can't help but start by commenting. It also illustrates what, as drivers, we deal with all the time, and we do personal injuries, so we're tuned into it. But you're always at risk, certainly on the highways. Always. Because you need to keep a distance that allows you to react.
Right.
And obviously it's difficult to do that because most people don't, you know. Right. And so it's a constant tension. But in this kind of a scenario, so you've got you've got our situation similar to the Alec Baldwin situation where another vehicle cuts off the bus.
Exactly. Did you see how that was so similar? I was like, wow, you got the same situation here.
And it's actually kind of a common accident scenario, isn't it, really? So and especially you're on the highway, so at least in his situation, something happens sort of out of the blue, but here on the highway, it's absolutely predictable that people are going to be cutting in and out of traffic.
Very much so.
And at rapid speed, so that it's a danger. So you have to be on the lookout. So it's always going to depend on the particular facts and circumstances. But the first bus that was
initially cut off,
cut off and unable to stop, or comes to a quick stop, and that bus arguably was negligent. Now, that depends very much on the circumstance. Because obviously, if this driver literally just crosses right in front of the bus, so the bus couldn't have done anything, and that's obviously what the bus driver would perhaps say, probably.
Right. We're suspecting that's what's going to be said.
But then you have the domino effect. Now, I would say I haven't often had a situation where it's multiple buses. That's a bad day.
Yeah.
Really. But they would also, so this would cut both ways. It's hard for another vehicle to miss a bus. It's a big vehicle, kind of like a whale of a garbage truck, a whale of a bus.
Yeah. We have an ongoing theme.
That's
here.
right. And then you have the situation where, with a big vehicle like that, it's harder for them to come to a stop. They need a lot more room to come to a stop.
Yeah.
So they have to factor that in, and to the extent they don't, there's an aspect of negligence there. Any vehicle noticing if you're behind a bus, you got to be aware of that.
Right.
You need to have a better spacing, taking into account that if that bus has to come to a quick stop, it's going to take that bus some time to do that.
Exactly right. Right.
So it's always easy. So in this situation, you have multiple attorneys fly-specking the whole situation and saying, well, you should have done this and you should have done that.
Yes.
But that's actually what our liability system is designed to allow, because each person that is injured as a result of an accident like that has the opportunity to have representation on their behalf to investigate the circumstances and develop the arguments that would support a claim on their behalf, and that's what we would be looking at as lawyers.
Exactly right. And so, how do you feel about the fact that you have this rear, we'll call it the tail SUV, who ultimately was the one to make the first impact, it seems. However, if it weren't for the initial cutoff, maybe the domino effect would not have been set into motion. So I'm thinking about this rear tail driver, the SUV, who is essentially usually the one that we see as the at-fault vehicle. Mm-hmm. Is there any theory of liability that you can see for that vehicle against the initial phantom, or maybe they know who that car is, that cut off the first bus?
So everyone pretty much that drives thinks of rear-end collision, you're responsible if you rear-end somebody else. Mm-hmm. And generally speaking, that's true. There's kind of a presumption of that.
Right.
But there are, as is always the case with almost everything, exceptions to that rule. And one of the exceptions is if a vehicle comes to a sudden stop in a manner in which you would not reasonably expect it. And that would be what the SUV driver, that would be their defense, that, I'm driving along, I did make reasonable provision, and all of a sudden this happens, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. But it's also going to be, and this is a situation, again, like we've talked about how in Florida there's the concept of comparative negligence. There's also a concept where different responsible parties, the percentage of responsibility would be determined and apportioned by a jury.
Exactly right. And in that instance, there could be quite a bit of comparative fault on that SUV driver, so much so that now under the current Florida law, they may no longer have a claim.
Right, it could well be. Now, there's so many ways to split all this up. As I say, it would be very...
Because even with the bus drivers, as sad as it is, you would think that even the buses have to maintain a safe distance between the other buses.
And it would be much trickier for them. Much trickier, obviously. That's why we don't necessarily want to be right in front of or even behind necessarily. But definitely not right in front.
Absolutely right. I'm always a little bit nervous when I see big trucks coming up in my rearview mirror. I'm like, ugh.
It's like, I think I'll just move aside, let you go by me.
And then it's like, sometimes you're like, do they have enough room to stop? They look like they're getting, the speed doesn't look like they're slowing down fast enough. But so that's always the concern when you're around these very, very large vehicles. I just want to point out very briefly, I think we've touched on it before many, many times, but obviously if there is some liability of the bus drivers for, maybe failing to maintain a safe distance or for a sudden and unexpected stop, as Lorrie mentioned, there are caps that are going to come into play when it comes to sovereign immunity. And so when you have like this 2-year-old, they said that was airlifted because of the trauma alert for that child, could be very significant injuries. And if in fact they're making claims against the school board, then that is going to be capped.
Yeah, so it's a very complicated area, but under the law of what we call sovereign immunity, sovereign is kind of like the king in a certain sense of the word. This is all.
That's a good way to think of it.
It comes to us from the old English common law, so it's rooted in those concepts, and so it's kind of been transferred to the government. So you cannot freely and without restriction just sue the government.
Exactly.
And there are public policy reasons for that, because we are all funding our government. So in a way, it's kind of coming out of us.
Right.
But regardless, there are those public policy considerations. So in Florida, currently the maximum amount an individual could recover in a claim is $200,000, and the maximum for an incident would be $300,000. So if you have multiple parties that were injured in an incident, the same incident, the total payout of liability coverage in this sense from the school board would be $300,000.
$300,000 per accident. Right.
Now, they do sometimes have insurance, and they can sometimes under their own public policy elect to settle claims.
Right.
You can get a judgment for an excess amount over those amounts, and then in very rare cases, a bill can be brought to the Florida legislature called a claims bill, and and this would be a situation where you had catastrophic injury with multi-million dollars worth of damages. Right. There are situations when that can occur, but by and large, in the general situation, if you are in a situation where it is a government entity that is responsible that you're suing, you're going to have a limitation. Top scenario is $200,000. If there are multiple people involved, it's not even going to be that because of the cap, the overall cap.
Exactly right. And that would be, of course, very much a factor in a case like this where there's so many different potential claimants. But as Lorrie mentioned before in the show, this is always a good opportunity to remind people you want to be gathering evidence, getting witness statements, taking photographs. If you're involved in a situation like this where there's just this chain reaction and you can anticipate, I don't know where this car came from and how it all happened. I just know that we were all impacted. You want to be gathering that evidence early on because it can, again, as she said, the lawyers are going to be trying to piece it together. And I think that's one good thing about these kinds of accidents where there's school buses is because a lot of them have video cameras.
True.
And capabilities to record not only the inside of the bus, but also, the exterior. And so that gives you a better perspective on what actually happened as opposed to traditional vehicles. But even then, attorneys, we can request the data from the vehicles to try to determine what was going on. Or with public school buses, you can even do public school records requests and try to get statements and photos and things like that. So these are the kind of things that you have to think about early on, gathering as much information and intel as you can so that when it comes down to figuring out who is at fault and where the liability lies, you want to have as many ducks in a row as you can.
Right, and this would be a classic situation because it's so complicated with the number of parties, the insurance issues, that early consultation with an attorney would be especially important. Much. Anytime you have any thought that you might be injured, in an accident, you should obviously be consulting an attorney, but especially in a situation like this where it's going to be very difficult and you're frankly going to have a lot of competing claims.
Absolutely.
For probably a relatively limited pot, so to speak.
Absolutely right. So this was very recent as well. And so I hope that, of course, the students and the staff and faculty in that county are doing well.
Yes.
And everyone just has to be very cautious when you're on the roads because, this kind of thing is more common than you might.
We got a lot of people
expect.
moving to Florida, or visiting. So we have
Very
a lot of cars
so.
on the road.
And it seems, and I don't know if it's just because things shifted with the displacement, but it just seemed like things were so hectic after the storms last year.
Yes.
The traffic patterns changed, and things still are a bit more congested than normal.
Right. No,
I don't know what that reason is. If some people said, oh, everybody kind of came off the beach, and so now everybody's more inland, and so there's more traffic and there's construction vehicles. But I've noticed that the traffic pattern hasn't quite gotten back to normal. It's still very congested and crowded out there. So have to be safe. So we have another current event, Lori, and this one's very unique as well. And I wanted to bring it up just because you just never know. All kinds of things can happen. And I remember having a strange case before, not quite like this, but involved shooting, like this case does. And I probably would have never expected to have a case like that, but these things do happen, right? And so this case is about people that were injured after gunfire broke out on the roadway.
Oh, wow.
Which led to crashes. And so my case was different before I jump into this article where it was like a convention of some kind where it was an outdoor convention in South Florida, and it's like one of those, not Comic-Con, but people do dress up.
Okay.
And they have vendors and performances, and it was one of those kinds of things. And gunfire broke out in that kind of a setting, and it was claims being made against the event organizers and security. And there ended up being a big global mediation for everyone that unfortunately was shot. And we were able to get things resolved, but of course it was a very unusual situation where people were just there to enjoy themselves, and they end up getting shot by a random individual who I think was targeting someone specific, but of course bullets don't have names on them.
Yes,
so and a lot of people got hurt. This is slightly different. So it appears, and I don't have a lot of backstory, but not very long ago, there were two people who were taken to the hospital in St. Petersburg after gunfire broke out on a Pinellas County road. The spokesperson for the St. Pete Police Department said that in two separate vehicles, the drivers began shooting at each other around noon, so in the middle of the day.
So it's like two different cars?
Two different cars.
That was a bad day.
Yeah, and they're right in the middle of the day on 49th Street and 17th Avenue South in St. Pete. So busy road. And one of the drivers looks like, actually, no, this was not one of the drivers. There was a 19-year-old in one of the vehicles that was shot. And he was taken to Orlando Health for treatment. And then they said that individual was in critical condition. His brother, who was also in the car, was injured during the crash because the vehicles veered off the road. And he was listed as stable. There was one suspect who was in custody following the shooting, but there does not appear to be any formal charges that have been filed. And so there was an ongoing investigation, I guess, involving the criminal case, and that was all that they were willing to release at that time. So they have this one individual who was injured in the course of the car accident. Then you have another individual who was injured by a gunshot. So these are two vehicles on the roadway. And it's a very odd situation, but as we're looking at that, let's say the passenger who was simply in the vehicle at the time where this car loses control because they're being shot at and it crashes, he's injured as a result of that crash. What kind of situation do we have here in terms of liability? Because we have maybe some negligence, maybe some intentional acts.
Right. Another very complicated situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's because, for car insurance coverages to apply, the injury is going to have to be related to negligence in operation of the car
in
some
operation
way,
of the vehicle.
some connection to that. So the passenger arguably, and hopefully there would probably be a claim that could be made there. But there could be a lot of defenses that the insurance company could raise, obviously.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because intentional conduct, criminal conduct, is not going to be a covered event.
Exactly. Right.
Because insurance covers negligence. If someone does something on purpose, especially something criminal, that would be an exclusion from the policy. Yeah. So again, you'd have to sort out all those facts, and it would be pretty fact specific there, for sure. But if the driver of the car loses control of the vehicle and the person is injured as a result of that accident, that would be a case that I think probably could be brought.
Right, and I think that would be the first challenge, from an attorney perspective, is determining if there's going to be any kinds of defense about the intentionality of what happened, and if there's exclusions for that or for criminal acts. But then, of course, trying to make sure we understand how the car crashed, because I think one would argue that part was not intentional. The fact that the car,
I think we
went
could
off
presume
the road.
They didn't really mean to do that.
Exactly. And so I think there's clearly going to be a negligent component there. It's just knowing that you're going to face quite a bit of defense in regards to the intentional acts that kind of...
And as a practical matter, while there might be coverage, it's also going to be pretty important, frankly, the involvement of all the parties. Because if the passenger somehow, which does happen, got caught up in something that he didn't or she didn't have any idea was going to go down, that's one scenario. On the other hand, if it's something that person was really kind of aiding and abetting or a participant in, that's going to be pretty hard to make a sympathetic case.
I agree. If they were loading up the gun or doing something to somehow assist, and they were participating in this joint enterprise, if you will, then I think you're absolutely right. Then that's probably not a claim that I would say should be made there. But I think the biggest issue, of course, is going to be the potential exclusions for the intentional acts, and the fact that many policies are likely going to not cover that kind of behavior. And it sounds like it could be road rage. We don't know. We don't know what was going on.
We really don't know. And those would be things like you can now, and the weird thing is you got the two vehicles, because you think there are instances of road rage.
Yeah.
Now, this doesn't necessarily sound like it's rage of some kind.
Yeah.
But
it was definitely rage. We don't know why, though.
But there can be a lot of things that happen. And one of the things I think, maybe sometimes people will think, oh, how can lawyers argue on this side of a case or that side of a case? But really, a part of what makes our system work for everyone, really, is to be able to look at claims and determine whether something can be pursued that ethically can be pursued. And you really don't, the layperson isn't going to really know all the factors that come into play. I spent a decade as a public defender many, many years ago now, but I had many cases with young people that got caught up in something somebody else was actually the driving force behind. And then got hurt as a result. So, so there could be something going on.
Great point, Lori. So there's always more than that meets the eye. With that being said, this has been a great show. Thank you, Lori, for joining me. As always, we hope you got something out of tonight's show. As you know, we are here every Tuesday at 5 o'clock with your live legal call-in talk show. This has been FLALAW live on the radio, and we look forward to seeing you back next Tuesday at 5 p.m.